Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you, our audience, to the first in a series of webinars on various relevant topics pertaining to supply chain. My name is Stuart Rosenberg. I'm a professor of supply chain here at Middlesex College and your host for today's webinar. For our audience, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared post-event as well as a PDF and YouTube page whose link we will share via email. Before we start our webinar, we would like to bring you a brief word from our sponsor, Middlesex College, and their Director of Corporate Education and Training, Aileen Vega.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Aileen Vega, Director of Corporate Education and Training at Middlesex College. We're thrilled to have you join us for this dynamic webinar on supply chain disruptions, a topic that's reshaping industries and creating exciting challenges and opportunities. Whether you're a seasoned professional or a student eager to dive into the logistics world, today's session is packed with insights that you can immediately apply in your career or studies. At Middlesex College, we pride ourselves with empowering future leaders in supply chain and logistics management through our comprehensive associate's degree program, and for those looking to enhance their skills, our corporate education and training department offers specialized modules accredited by CSCMP alongside grant-funded training tailored to your employer's needs. From mastering Microsoft Office to honing essential soft skills like leadership and problem solving, we're here to support your growth. Feel free to reach out for more information at 732-906-4681 or email at avega@middlesexcc.edu. We're excited to help you unlock your potential. Now, without further ado, I'm honored to introduce Marilyn Gettinger, our supply chain instructor, who will talk more about our supply chain management certification program.
Good morning. This is Marilyn Gettinger. Thank you for being with me. I am the instructor for the Middlesex College Supply Chain Management Programs. And I have been involved in the program since 2015, and I have found that the materials and the certifications have opened exciting job opportunities as well as career growth for students who have attended the program. The materials that we use have been developed by a consortium of colleges, and they have been approved by a globally respected professional organization known as the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. So the course itself provides a clear understanding and answers the question is what is a supply chain and what is supply chain management? Where did it come from and what's its impact on the business community? So students who are attending the program, they're going to gain information, both basic and advanced, in principles that fall under supply chain management, demand planning, procurement and supply management, warehousing, inventory management, manufacturing, service operations, transportation, and customer service. This program applies these principles that we gain from the course to current business challenges. The second module is an in-depth view of warehousing, and the third module explores customer service operations in a supply chain environment. Each of the modules is then followed by a test developed and provided by the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. And again, the Council is a globally recognized professional organization focusing on supply chain management. Middlesex College works with students and organizations on open enrollment, online and on-site classes to support busy professionals. If you have questions about the program, please contact me via email at mgettinger6@gmail.com or via phone 908-577-1859.
Next, I want to introduce Sheila Grock of the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals to talk about the organization and what they provide to members and students.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. We have partnered with Middlesex for quite a few years in helping to administer their testing and certification. And we realized that one of the things that the students might not be aware of is that we offer a deeply discounted student membership to CSCMP, which is the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. And the membership exists to help students determine their path in supply chain. We have mentorship available. There's a young professionals organization within CSCMP that can help you with things like resume building, interview prep, again, mentorship and connection. So we are dedicated to education within the supply chain field to ensure that we are shored up to, come up against whatever is to come. As we see right now, we really need education more than ever at this point. So what we are going to offer is a student membership, which normally is $40, $35 between now and May 5th. I will drop my email in the chat along with the code for any questions that you have and help in signing up, because a code sometimes can be a little bit difficult in our system. So again, thank you so much for letting me be a part of the webinar.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you very much. Glad you can make it. For this first webinar, we will be discussing supply chain disruptions, defining them, talking about the types, the causes, and the severity of them. We will also present a few case studies as to the best ways to manage them for the best possible outcome. To assist us with this knowledge, we are fortunate to have as our guest one John Conte of Conte Logistics Consulting. John, thank you for coming aboard, joining us. I know you're taking time out from your busy day and schedule. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Ray, could you just, as a short bio, introduce yourself to our audience, and then we can continue discussing the topic.
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone, John Conte, CEO, founder of Conte Logistics Consulting. I've also held positions in organizations such as IKEA, Holman Automotive, Find a Parts, Simple Tire, and basically my whole background over the last about 25 years has been supply chain logistics. So really excited to talk about disruptions, give some insights into the disruptions that I've seen, talk about current disruptions and ways we can help to try to mitigate some of the disruptions that you'll find crossing your desk in the world of supply chain.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Thank you. I guess the best way to do this is to just jump right into it. So, the best way to do this, again, is jump right into it, and I guess hand it off to you and basically say, definition of supply chain disruptions. What are they? And their types. You can describe that.
Yeah, sure. So, when I look at disruptions, I look at them in levels, right? So, how severe is the disruption? And we could go to the next slide, but basically, you look at it as a scale, a sliding scale, right? So you have minor, moderate, and severe levels of disruption, right? Now, the scale can differ depending on your business. right? So a minor disruption could be a major disruption to another organization, right? So I think, these are going to be subjective to the type of business that you're in, and what your supply chain looks like, right? But typically, a minor disruption is going to be something that's a minor delay. Maybe it only keeps you down for an hour, right? Minor disruption. Moderate could be a few hours to a few days, and then severe would be something where it could be timeline wise, it could keep you down a few weeks. Or you could look at it from a dollar perspective and how much money are you losing compared to the time. But I'll stop there and let you kind of digest that, and we can build out from there.
Yes, thank you, John. Well, getting into the moderate or the cyber attacks, how would that cause stock out and revenue loss? Can you explain that to our audience? Is the
Yeah,
stock
yeah,
out
great.
portion?
Yeah, great question. So, when it comes to a cyber attack, it's hitting all or some of your major systems, right? So, in the supply chain world, you're typically going to be dealing with an enterprise resource planning system, an inventory management system, a warehouse management system. So, those three systems combined could, if they're attacked, could limit your ability to update inventory, to add inventory, to even remove inventory, which then could throw off all of your analytics, right? So if you're able to still process orders and ship product, your inventory might not be reflective properly. So you could still essentially take orders in without actually having the right amount of inventory reflected in your system, which would create a stock out.
Okay, but wouldn't that lead to, as you said, a major inventory loss?
Yes, for sure. Inventory loss, revenue loss. You could also lose reputation, right? By having customers that are losing faith in your ability to be able to, get them their items in a timely fashion.
Um, so can you go into any further detail about how these disruptions would affect any business, not just the logistics business, but let's say a manufacturer? And I know there's many kinds of different manufacturers. So if you want to pick different manufacturers and types of manufacturers and
Yeah,
describe what would
yeah, for
happen.
sure. So yeah, I mean, this type of disruption is going to hit a few different levels. So not only manufacturers, but distributors as well too, right? So it could have a ripple effect that kind of goes through the supply chain all the way to the final customer. On a manufacturer side, there could be raw materials that they could run out of in an instance where their systems are shut down. They don't have enough inventory. They might not even know how much inventory they have. So therefore, at a manufacturing level, they won't be able to produce the final product, right, to be able to ship out to the distributor for the distributor to then be able to sell or provide to their customers.
Okay, thanks, John. As an example of that, I think the next slide, if we have a case study, if you want to, you can go into as much detail as you can about that.
Yeah.
And I think it's a hurricane, and
Yes.
describe what happened and how it affected the company.
Yeah.
What was their
Yeah.
outcome?
So
How did they mitigate it? Sorry. Hmm.
yeah, no, you're good. There's a little delay on my side, but all good. So, basically, when it comes to disruptions, there's varying levels, right? And I think a lot of time when we talk, supply chain disruption, a lot of our minds go to a hurricane or some sort of natural disaster, right? So this is worst case scenario where a hurricane happens and it takes out actual buildings, right? So it literally takes out the buildings, it takes out infrastructure, it takes out inventory, it takes out assets such as vehicles and things like that. So once you make sure that all people are accounted for, right, and everybody is safe and that sort of thing, then you have to start assessing your losses, right? So in a hurricane situation, in this particular case for this organization, they ended up losing about 25% of their inventory, right? So from there, what ends up happening is, you have to start looking at, well, how can we get our products where they need to go from other distribution centers? How many facilities were impacted? How many DCs do we have inventory in? And how are we able to make that work while we can, place orders with a manufacturer to try to get more emergency stock, into our facilities, back into our customers' hands. So all of that happens in a business continuity plan. So typically your organization's going to build a plan that supply chain should be a part of, that basically runs through all of these scenarios and the what ifs and how would we react if a hurricane ended up hitting our facility. So in this case, this organization had a business continuity plan. They had other locations that were not in, weather prone areas that they stocked up on the inventory that was in this facility. So in case there was an emergency, they would be able to not have a total disruption to their business, and they would be able to essentially limp along, fulfilling about 70% of orders for customers instead of a total loss.
Thanks, John. That was very interesting. By the way, just curious, where did that take place in that destruction of the hurricane in the Midwest? I'm just curious.
No, that was I believe, Florida for sure.
Oh, okay.
Is where that
Hurricane.
took place. Yeah, yeah. So the Midwest, that might be more of a tornado
Yeah,
situation.
right.
But again, where you're placing distribution centers,
Mm.
where you have your assets, I mean, these are all things you have to look at, and property could be really cheap somewhere, and there might be a reason why, and you have to do that research, right?
That's why I asked that question, because people many people don't realize, okay, we're going to build a DC center or facility in the middle of Nebraska, and then they forget about Tornado Alley. So that's why I was
Correct.
deliberately asked
Yeah,
that question
yeah. There's a lot of
of
give
where
and
that
take.
took place.
Yeah, there's a lot of give and take in this space, right? Because sometimes
Mm.
you would think, hey, having a DC closest to the port could be a great place to have my inventory, right? We can get it in quickly and that sort of thing. We can cross dock it, but if you're by the water, there's going to be some sort of risk, right? And
Mhm.
it could be weather related. So just all these things need to be taken into consideration when you're designing a network, figuring out where to put warehouses, distribution centers, that sort of thing.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, John. That was the point of the question. Another. This is a little bit more personal, and because you and I, a lot of people in this room probably went through it. Um, Describe what your company and you went through for Operation for Sandy, when Sandy came through New Jersey, because I'm sure many of our audiences from New Jersey, and they remember, of course, what happened at the time. So if you can describe what your company how your company mitigated Operation Sandy, that would be great.
Yeah. So at the time, I was in the automotive space when that happened. So, for us, it was, loss of inventory for sure when it came to parts and vehicles that were at, various dealerships in that area. That was a really interesting hurry up and turn on business continuity planning, right? Because our weather is traditionally stable, right, in this area. And that was something that nobody really saw coming. And for our business model at that time, it was a little tough because you're dealing with vehicles, right? So that's inventory that you don't want to carry too much of, because you don't want to get stuck with it, right? It's inventory, it's money on your books, that sort of thing. So, in that scenario, it wasn't a traditional warehouse operation we had to worry about. It was more vehicles and assets and things like that that got damaged and lost. And
Mhm.
again, when it comes to business continuity planning, a lot of insurance is key in success, right? So making sure you have the right levels of insurance, the right types of insurance, the right insurance riders for businesses to be able to come out of it as whole as possible. At the time, for any businesses that were damaged or disrupted in that area, I know it was a lot of small businesses. At least that's what I was reading about at the time, was there were a lot of small businesses that were impacted. And it didn't sound to me as if there were a lot of business continuity plans put in place prior to that happening, right? So you definitely saw a lot of chaos and a lot of unknown. And I think after that, you start to see business continuity planning really start to step into the small and medium sized businesses now. And it's more, top of mind when you're coming up with a business plan, if you're just getting started, or if you have an existing business and you need to think about, hey, wait a minute, I only have one supplier of this product and they happen to be in the area that was devastated, right? So I probably need some redundancy and, other suppliers of the same product that I could flip to when there's an emergency.
Right. Yeah. We all share that unfortunate time with Hurricane Sandy, because I myself was in a warehouse at the time, and we had a lockdown. They wouldn't let us leave the building, so we all understand what happened then. Um, the next thing I was thinking about is a little bit tangent as far as not really manufacturing, but this came as a surprise to us too. Nobody expected it. Nobody could have predicted COVID back in 2019, 2020, and that affected the supply chain. Can you go into that? Can you enlighten us about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a time we would love to forget, I'm sure. Uh, but yeah, I mean, exactly, right? Kind of came out of nowhere, right? There was no warning, and it disrupted, labor for sure, right? So, things were shut down right away. And then in order to even limp businesses along, there became all these mandates, and we had to stay so many feet apart from one another. So imagine a busy distribution center where you can only stand, X amount of feet apart from one another, running staggered shifts. So this really challenged the supply chain in general, right? I think all businesses, suffered. Um, and one of the things that we went through during this time was, again, back to inventory, right? So after we got through the people part and made sure people were good and safe, and we had workforces, we started to then think about, okay, what are we going to do now with product coming into the country? There were backups at the port, there were labor shortages. What are we going to do? And at the time for us, it was all about having redundancy, right? Multiple suppliers, offshore, onshore suppliers. And costs definitely had gone up, right? You're sourcing something from China, you could get it a lot more cost effective than if you're sourcing it in the States. But being able to have plan A and plan B is really really what helped. Another thing that caused us to be very nimble was adopting technology very rapidly, right? So, for instance, the organization that I was with at the time didn't have an opportunity for you to buy online and pick up at store. That now it's a feature everybody's very comfortable with and used to using, but it didn't exist prior to COVID. So very quickly forming relationships with technology providers and getting that technology implemented so customers can place an order and actually pick it up without having to go into a store, was a really big lever that we had to pull to maintain revenue. So for us, we were basically able to operate at about a 92% fulfillment rate, right, of being able to get customers to buy products when they weren't allowed in the stores, right? When that mandate lifted, it became a feature customers really enjoyed, and we kept after that. But I think the biggest thing COVID showed us, at least in the US, was how fragile our supply chain is. From truck drivers needing to be able to pick up products, to port workers being able to move containers, to then once it gets to the warehouse, right, and even into a store or being able to be shipped, we saw how fragile it was. And I think I think for the supply chain, there were a lot of lessons taught that people really took to heart and decided, okay, moving forward, we're not going to get call it not looking again, right? And you do see, I mean, at least with clients that I work with, you do see a lot more redundancy happening when it comes to a supplier base or even shipping carriers, right? And what carriers they're going to work with. You're just seeing more multiples of the same type of providers to be able to make sure that the business won't see a major disruption when there's another event that takes place.
Hmm. Yeah, no, agree. We were all part of that unfortunate time. But just taking a little bit tangent, your opinion, your point of view, a little bit, because COVID affected the health industry as well, medical, hospitals, doctors. So what happened there? What's your opinion on what happened there with COVID and the health industry, medical
Yeah,
industry?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't a part of that industry, and you could definitely see the holes in the supply chain there, right? And the medical industry, as an outsider looking in, right, my opinion is it's a very highly regulated industry, and a lot of the people in the healthcare supply chain industry, that's kind of all they know, and it seems like it's kind of hard for somebody to break into healthcare supply chain if you haven't been in it, and I think that's a detriment because I think there's a lot of really great experience and ways of looking at things differently that aren't in the healthcare supply chain space because it's kind of you know what you do every day, right? You're not looking at it from a fresh lens. But in that space, I mean, it was, in my opinion, 85% about people, right? You need people, you need drivers, you need equipment, and I just feel like it was completely understaffed. I mean, hospitals, in my opinion, weren't staffed appropriately with equipment, right? So you were seeing shortages of ventilators and different things like that. And you kind of have to think about like, well, what's the supply chain planning that goes into that, right? They know, how many numbers of beds that they have. But if you think about it from an inventory perspective, it's you have X amount of beds, but what happens when you have overflow, right? Do you have safety stock? Like you have to kind of think about it in that perspective. And I don't think that was happening then. And, a shout out to all of our healthcare providers and the people that were on the front lines dealing with the early days of the pandemic, because it was very scary. But at the same time, I think, again, they probably learned some lessons through that exercise.
Well, that's true. I think we all did from all perspectives that, the supply chain is fragile, and we have to be constantly vigilant about it. But saying that also brings into another part of disruption in which you mentioned truckers, drivers, over the past few weeks, I'm sure you've read it and seen it, that there are a number of trucking companies that have declared bankruptcy and folded up shop. So how is that going to, affect the supply chain with moving product from point A to point B?
Yeah, that's a interesting problem to tackle, right? And there's a few things that play into it. Number one, you have an aging workforce of truck drivers, right? So last I had heard, the average age of a truck driver was 55 plus years old, right? So you have a profession that people aren't necessarily breaking down the door to run into, right? But it's a very important part of the supply chain, and a lot of the times it's downplayed or underplayed. On top of that, you have labor rates to deal with, right? So, as you start to see, labor rates 20, 25, $30 an hour for those roles, it gets harder for those companies to actually create a profitable margin to keep the business up and running. You have to take in consideration the cost of the asset, right? When you're looking at a Class 8 vehicle, Peterbilt, Mack International, I mean, you could pay six figures for just the cab, right? And then, if you have your own trailer assets, and then there's maintenance. So the trucking industry is not a cheap industry to get in. And if anybody wants to start a trucking company, it's not for the faint of heart. I can tell you that. So I think what you began to see was, as we had this big rush of shipping need during COVID, right, where e-commerce exploded, right, and you started seeing all types of things get shipped that traditionally wouldn't to consumers' houses, such as tires, big and bulky is the new norm, right? Washers, dryers, all those things are getting delivered, LTL, things like that. I think a lot of trucking companies staffed up, bought a lot of assets, hired employees, and then as that started to come down, they started to have situations where they had too many assets and they didn't have enough work, and they had, drivers and they didn't have enough work. So I think you started to see, a lot of those companies start to close their doors because they didn't have enough work to keep them up and running. There was a lot of government handouts that took place with businesses, right? PPP loans and things like that, where I think a lot of businesses took advantage of it and then didn't realize I have to pay them back. And it got very messy out there, right? And you saw a lot of acquisition in that space as well. So you saw a lot of the bigger trucking companies buying up smaller trucking companies to increase their footprint and that sort of thing. So the trucking space, I mean, if we don't have truck drivers and we don't have trucks, the product's just not going to move, right? So anything you have in your home, a truck driver delivered one way or another, right? So I think the trucking space definitely became disrupted from a big spike, and then now it kind of went down and sort of normalized. So yeah, you did see a lot of trucking companies close their doors. You do see, drivers retiring, and you're seeing a lot of the stronger, well-placed trucking companies doing a lot of things to attract talent, right? So recruiting from colleges, putting people in leadership rotation programs, getting them as a driver first, put in your few years as a driver, then you become a terminal manager and you can move through the corporate system. So there's sign-on bonuses and things like that you see out there. So that's definitely another fragile area of the supply chain for sure.
Thanks, John. That was very clear of what's happening with the trucking industry and why the number of trucking companies have gone bankrupt. Just to change gears a little bit, another type of disruption that we would like to talk about is um, basically viruses, malware, ransomware. So, do you mind going into that for a few minutes?
Yeah, sure. So, every now and again, this makes the news. It happens a lot more frequently, but when it happens to a big company, that's what kind of gets all the headlines, right? But this is happening every day to lots of companies, and I think there's not enough supply chain and logistics leaders out there really understanding that this is going to impact you, right? And at the end of the day, once this happens and an organization takes over your systems and won't give it back to you until you pay, if you've ever been through it, the government is here to help, but to a certain point, you're not getting full resources, and again depends on the size and scope of your business. And in a lot of instances, people will pay to continue the business to run, right? Because each day that your business is down and you can't fulfill orders, or even if it's a SaaS company and you can't provide, your users the experience they're paying for, you're going to get to a point where you're going to say it's just cheaper to pay and get rid of this than it is to keep fighting it, right? So at least in the experience that I've had, we had a ransomware attack that basically shut down our transportation management system completely, right? We couldn't create shipping labels. We couldn't create bills of lading. We couldn't even route shipments on our own fleet of delivery vehicles. So completely dead in the water, right? And think about that. That's typically your last system in the chain of technology. So customers can place orders, things will flow through. They're getting notifications that your order's been picked and it's going to be shipped, and here's your expected delivery date. And then it's hitting this bottleneck where, shippers are like, oh gosh, we can't get this stuff out. Like, what do we do, right? And you become so reliant on this technology that you kind of don't think about it, that it's going to happen, because every day you're just humming along, you're shipping thousands of packages, right? So in this instance, what basically happened was, went what I called old school, right? We broke out because we actually still had these in the warehouse, but we actually had paper bills of lading, and we actually had sticker books of pro numbers for anything that was LTL. So it took a lot of manual handwriting and stickering, and then manual hand keying in to get customers their tracking. And when it came to parcel delivery, we were lucky enough that we could use another website to still do that digitally. And unfortunately, we had to go on each individual carrier's website to be able to create a shipment. So if it went USPS or if it was supposed to go FedEx or UPS, whomever the carrier is, DHL and so on, we had to actually go on each individual website and hand key in, the address and the shipping service and all of that stuff. And we were able to essentially get about 85% of orders out each day by the order cutoff time. And it took about 5 days to kind of get through the process. And what ended up happening was a negotiation for essentially half of what they were asking for, right? So I won't go into detail on what the number was they wanted, but it basically got to a point where we agreed to settle for half of what they wanted to unlock systems and give full control back and all of that sort of thing. And I can tell you, I mean, FBI gets involved, local authorities, FBI, there's some international, groups that will get involved, and essentially they can't even pinpoint where these people are, right? They're bouncing off of different VPNs and servers and things, and you have no idea where things are going. And, the feedback we received was sometimes it's just cheaper to pay them, right? So after you get through that agonizing experience, you learn and you're like, okay, don't want this to happen to us again. So what do we do, right? So what we decided was, instead of having our own homegrown system, right, and obviously it wasn't patched properly and had issues and things like that, let's just go with a cloud-based provider that we can have all the same functionality for. And then what you do is you put it in your agreement with them that if they are attacked by ransomware, right, what happens to you? Like, if you're not back up and running within X amount of time, you don't have to pay your invoice with them. There's things you can work out that take the brunt of the danger off of you. And you could also have a secondary TMS that you could utilize strictly for emergency purposes that you can flip to. So once you go cloud based, it gives you a little bit more functionality. But yeah, in that scenario, it was not a great experience, but you learn a lot from it, and then you hope it never happens again.
Yeah. Just in conjunction with that question, since that was your experience with your company that you worked for, in your best opinion, because this always struck me when things like this happen, a company by the name of Amazon, it's never happened to them. We always get our deliveries. So what's going on with them? Why haven't they, been disrupted like that? In your best opinion. I know it's hard. You never worked for them, but
Yeah, no, great question. And opinion wise, I mean, what I see from the outside is, I'm sure it has happened, right? In some instance or another, there's been some system that they've had an issue with, and they've been able to mitigate through business continuity planning, right? So a company like Amazon, I would think, is probably running tabletop exercises quite often. They probably have a whole department that's the job. The job is to make sure that things can run when there is a disruption. And usually what you hear in business continuity planning is, your plan works when nobody knows there was a disruption, right? So a lot of what goes into your planning, and as a supply chain professional, you should be inserting yourself into these meetings if you're not a part of them, right? Because you need to list out all of the systems that you use, all of the hardware, all of the software, who your partners are. And then you have to, rank those partners, by who's most critical, right? If a certain partner you can't work with for that day or that week, what does that do to your business? So, and then you have to kind of identify your ripple effects. Well, if supply chain can't perform X functions, then what happens to sales, or what happens to logistics, or what? So you really have to get to the nitty gritty and really, it's a great exercise because it allows you to really understand your business outside of the department that you work in. And it really kind of shows you who's most critical to your day-to-day success from a partner perspective. Who are the most important people in your organization that need to be up and running as soon as possible. If you take orders over the phone, you need to have a secondary location to be able to do that work if your location goes down, right? So there's lots of planning that goes into it. So I'm sure Amazon has been attacked multiple times. It probably happens multiple times a day, and might not be very successful. But I'm sure with an organization of their scope and size, they have a business continuity plan that pretty much thinks of every scenario, right?
Yeah. No, I was just curious because, we were talking about disruptions in this, and then, and everybody still gets their packages, the next day or whatever.
Yeah.
So it was surprising. But anyway, so just to, last question I have. So in your eyes, in your opinion, John, in your eyes, what's the future opportunities in managing all these disruptions?
Yeah, I think, future opportunities are, to get to the future, you have to look to the past, right? So you have to get a good understanding of what's happened in the past. Where are the weak points in your supply chain? If we're talking about it just from the supply chain perspective, where are the weak points? And even with your suppliers, you need to understand what their weak points are. You can ask, because we do this when we work with suppliers, we ask, what's your business continuity plan? If you want to do business with us, you have to supply us with your business continuity plan, right? And then we'll look to see how does it overlap with ours. So for the future, right? If you're looking to manage disruptions, you kind of have to know what's happened in the past and how did it fail. You have to be able to shore up any of those leaks or gaps. Then you have to look towards what's happening currently and what that can do for the future, right? So tariffs, everybody's talking about, right? And it's been so up and down, and being part of the automotive space when it comes to tariffs, lots of products do get manufactured in other countries, right? So it's been just a tidal wave of cost increases are coming, and then they're not, and then it's on pause, right? And you need to be able to think, if you're a distributor, well, what's this going to do to my customer? How can I help offset the cost to my customer? What other things can we offer to the customer? So I think, you have to look at your network, right? If you're trying to future proof your business, you have to look at your network and where are you on the map? What areas are potentially open to some sort of disruption, whether it's weather related, labor related. Do you have unions involved in your business, and could there be a strike, right? So in those instances, your company's running fine, your systems are running fine, there's no weather issue, but your workforce is saying, until we reach an agreement, we are not moving a muscle, right? So you need to really list out, depending on your business, all of your possible disruptions, and then how can you mitigate those disruptions if they do happen.
That was great information. Okay. Unfortunately, John, our time is drawing to a close. I would like to turn over. I would like to finally turn it over to our viewers if they have any questions for you. We are opening up a few minutes Q&A question. So we turn it over to our audience now. All right, no questions. I'm sorry, John. I guess
That's okay.
you
It's
answered
okay.
all
You know
their
what? It's
yes, you answered all
lunchtime
their questions
where
already.
people are eating. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, maybe two, but I guess you answered all the questions already. All right. So we'll just continue. We have, but before we sign off, okay, um, before we sign off, I'd like to thank all who participated, the audience. John, thank you again for lending us your expertise on this subject, and the college for sponsoring the event. We look forward to seeing you again during our second episode of our Global Supply Chain webinar series. Till the next time, this is Professor Rosenberg bidding everyone a good day and mitigate those disruptions. Thank you.